Changing keys is one of the most exciting things about songwriting, and it can be a great way to make your music more interesting and potentially unpredictable. In this video, we are going to look at 7 ways to change keys, and I'm going to provide some musical examples to get the point across. So the first method is shifting to the relative key. On the circle of fifths, every single major key has a minor key that it is paired with. Every pairing of major and minor key, they're all relative to one another. So A minor is relative to C, E minor is relative to G, B minor is relative to D, F sharp minor is relative to A, and so on and so forth. What makes keys relative is that they share all of the same notes. They just have their own respective tonal centers. Shifting to a relative key is a very common type of key change, and you find it all over music. A really good example of this is in the Tom Waits song, I Don't Want to Grow Up. The first part of the song is in D major, and then it goes to its relative minor, B minor. Well, when I lie in my bed at night, I don't want to grow up. Nothing ever seems to turn out right. I don't want to grow up. How do you move through a world of fog that's always changing things? Makes me wish that I could be a dog. Now, it's not a jarring change because, again, they are built from the same chords and the same notes, but you do sense that aesthetic change because we did go from a major key to a minor key. It got a little bit darker when we went to B minor. All right, so method number 2 is shifting to the parallel key. A parallel key is basically a major and a minor key that have the same tonic, such as C major and C minor. Yes, they have a different sequence of notes, but they both start on the letter C, so they are parallel. An example of this is in the Lou Reed song, Perfect Day. The verses are in B flat minor, and then we go into B flat major for the choruses. Now, this song is played on the piano, so the voicings of the chords are in a particular way. I am just going to play them as bar chords on the guitar just to keep it simple. Such a perfect day. Drink sangria in the park. And then later, when it gets dark, we go home. Right, so that's the verse. The chorus then goes to major. Oh, it's such a perfect day. I'm glad I spent it with you. Oh, such a perfect day. You just keep me hanging on. You just keep me hanging on. Once we go to major in the chorus, everything gets really grand and it has this amazing orchestral swell in the song. I mean, it's a really beautiful song, one of my favorite songs, I'd say. But yeah, having that parallel key shift definitely has a very interesting effect on the overall song, especially when you divvy it up so that it goes to major in the chorus. All right, so method number 3 is kind of similar. This is modal modulation. Modal modulation is basically when you start off in, let's say, F major, which would be known as F Ionian in the mode world, and then we shift to a parallel mode like F Mixolydian. We actually see this very type of modal modulation in Hey Jude. The verses are in F major or Ionian. Hey Jude, don't make it bad. Take a sad song and make it better. So F Ionian for most of the song, but in that outro section, they change to F Mixolydian. And the one difference between Mixolydian and Ionian is the flat 7. So in that outro section, there is an E flat chord. And it goes like this. It goes, na, 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 hey Jude. When it comes to modal modulation, it typically goes smoother when the mode that you're transitioning to is similar in aesthetic. If you start off in Ionian or major, it sounds better to go to Mixolydian or Lydian because both of those modes are brighter sounding. Meanwhile, if you start off in minor, aka Aeolian, it sounds a little bit more seamless to go to Phrygian or Dorian or perhaps Locrian because these are all darker sounding modes. Okay, so the fourth type of key change would be sequence modulation. Sequence modulation is basically when you take a melodic idea or maybe a chord progression and you essentially just copy and paste it in a different key. An example of this is in the Frank Sinatra song That's Life. Most of the song is in G major, but at the tail end they go up a half step to A flat major. So it starts off kind of like this. It goes, that's life. That's what all the people say. You're riding high in April, shot down in May. And the verse has several more chords after that. But they basically take that whole type of progression and they just transpose it up a half a step at the end of the song. And this is a really great songwriting technique. It makes the outro or the ending of a song a lot more satisfying to bump it up a little bit in key. So the outro sounds something like this. That's life. And I can't deny it. I thought of cutting out, but my heart ain't just gonna buy it. And we were able to get to this point by the ways of a dominant chord change too. So in the section right before we got to this key change, we were on a D chord, which is dominant to G, the original key. But then Frank Sinatra and company quickly shifts that dominant chord up a half step to allow us to step into the new key. The part goes like this. And I pick myself up and get back in the race. That's life. It's really clever to use lyrics that say pick myself up and then they actually go up. So really cool example of that type of modulation. Okay, so the next type of modulation is modulating on a pivot chord. On the circle of fifths, the closer two keys are to each other, the more notes and the more chords they're going to have in common, especially if they are next to each other. For instance, F major and C major, they're right next to each other. They have 6 notes in common and they have 4 chords in common. And we shift between C and F in yet another Beatles song, You Never Give Me Your Money, which I talked about a little in the last video too. Here is the change. We start off in C. We have a pivot chord of actually a C major chord, which is in both keys, and then we end up in F. Any jobber's got the sack, Monday morning, turn it back, yellow lorry slow, nowhere to go. Pivot chord, and oh, that magic feeling, nowhere goes. And oh, that magic feeling. C major is the 1 chord in the key of C, obviously, but at that moment where it changes, they kind of recontextualize it as the 5 of the new key, F, and then B flat's 4, and then F becomes the new 1. The next type is modulating using an altered pivot chord. This is basically for 2 keys that are a little bit more distant from each other and they don't have any chords in common. They maybe have a note in common or maybe a few notes, but that's about it. This is done by taking a pivot chord but having to alter one of the notes to get you to your target key. I have another Beatles example, and it's the last one, I promise, but it's in Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds. I'll play the section first, and then I'll tell you what's going on. I'm going to start halfway in the first verse, and then I'm going to end up in the pre-chorus. Somebody calls you, you answer quite slowly, a girl with kaleidoscope eyes. Cellophane flowers of yellow and green towering over your head. So in that verse, we started off in A major, and then we ended up in a mode of F major. We ended up in like a B-flat Lydian sound. But nonetheless, the 2 tonalities are distant from each other. They don't have any chords in common. So the Beatles had to use an altered pivot chord. They used the D minor to get themselves to the cellophane flowers part of the song. You see both keys have a D chord, but they differ in quality. In A major, it's supposed to be major. In the following key, it's supposed to be minor. So they decided, hey, since we're going to a key where there's supposed to be a D minor in it, let's use a D minor chord instead of major by altering the third, bringing it down a half step. So that's an example of an altered pivot chord. And you know, these distant key changes, they can be a little bit surprising, definitely very noticeable, but using chords like this can help you get there. The final one we're going to talk about is chain modulation. Chain modulation is basically when you use a sequence of dominant chords to cycle through the circle of fifths until you get to your target location. An example of this would be like starting on C major, then turning that into a dominant chord. So then we can go to F, which is right next to C on the circle of fifths. And then we turn that into a 7. So then we can go to B flat. And we just kind of repeat that type of idea. And you can just do that infinitely. You can just keep going in circles if you really wanted to. But this type of modulation is quite interesting. You're passing through several keys very quickly as opposed to spending time in them. And this ultimately creates a lot of energy and a lot of movement. You almost get lost in the haze of no tonality for a little bit because you're just constantly moving around. Chain modulations are something that I couldn't find in contemporary music. And if you guys know of an example, leave a comment below. But it is something that occurs in some ragtime music from earlier in the 20th century, as well as like some mid-century pop, maybe some jazz standards too. But nonetheless, this type of concept of just chaining along a bunch of dominant chords can be a really exciting and really eccentric way to write a chord progression to move things around in your song. So that was 7 ways to change keys in songwriting. These are not the only ways to change keys in songwriting, but this is a good list to start off with if you're new to this kind of concept. So take your instrument, sit down, write some cool chord progressions, change some keys, and have some fun. And let me know how it goes in the comments. And if you're confused about any of these topics, maybe drop a question in the comments too, and I'll try and get back to them. But thanks for watching. Be sure to subscribe so you can see more video lessons like this. And I'll see you guys in the next one.